Mic check.
Check 1 2 1 2 1 2. Okay, there. Now they know where I'm hiding, just in case.
Hiding. I should have brought some champagne or something.
That's right.
Right.
Those were the days.
Right. Hide it under the desk.
Exactly.
Okay, here we go. Let's have some fun. I think it's fair to say that most people who watch television news on a daily basis have a special relationship with the news anchor they choose to watch. You feel like you know them, that they're somewhat part of your family, and anytime they share just a bit of information about their personal life or their endeavors, you latch on because you want to know more. You know, it's hard not to feel that way when they are in your home, so to speak, every single day. You have dinner with them or you watch them before you go to bed at night. On a local level, you'll often see television journalists in your community emceeing events at the grocery store. We are your people. And I say we because I was part of that community for over 20 years. I've always enjoyed it when I was out and about, and people would come up to me and talk to me and say things like, "Wow, you're so much taller in person." And that always made me laugh. I never quite got it because when I read the news, I was sitting down. Another one I've grown to appreciate, and I do enjoy this comment now, is, "I grew up watching you." I get it. I guess I spent a few years on the TV and I'm not a spring chicken anymore. My favorite comment, I have to share this, was from a kindergarten student when I was visiting his class during read-in week. He looked up at me, had this puzzled look on his face, and he was frowning, and I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Carrie, doll, how did you get out of the TV?" So good, so good. And the funny thing was, I was just broadcasting to the city, sometimes to the province. Bottom line is people connect. Now imagine if you're broadcasting to the entire country every single night, well, Monday to Friday at least, on election nights, when people are looking for perspective and guidance, on evenings when war erupts, on life-changing events in our world. Well, today we're going to venture, hopefully, into the mind of one of the best who does just that. She is an award-winning television news anchor. She was an international affairs correspondent, was one of 83 Canadians named Officer of the Order of Canada. She won a Canadian Screen Award for Best National Newscast and Best News Anchor. You used to wake up with her in the morning, but now you go to bed with her. Now, I frame that in a certain way, but you know what I mean. Simply put, she is a powerhouse female. We know, we love her, we respect her, and now we get to hear a little bit more from her during this conversation. 45 minutes I get to spend talking to the chief anchor and senior editor of CTV National News, the one and only Lisa LaFlamme. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I just got to introduce
Well,
you.
that was quite an introduction, Carrie. I'm emotional just listening to it and your own history, because I know I worked in local news myself, and I know you're part of the fabric of a community, and it really matters to people. They have to trust you, and I think that's really what this job is all about.
Tell me more about that, since you opened the door to that, the trust that comes with this job, because the reality is when you are the face and the voice of the national news, people look to you, and the trust is at the heart of the connection.
It's a real responsibility, that part, because personally I weigh every word in our newscast, and we write this. We focus so much on how is the average person interpreting some huge story or some fun kicker, because it really is all about people understanding and stories resonating with them. So it's no small thing for me. And I take nothing for granted, because I've been in this business 30 years now, which shocks me, and I do know what it matters, what it means to people, and
Right.
it means so much to me as well that they trust me, and they know that whatever comes out of my mouth is something I have researched and worked on, so that we're bringing them the truest level we can of any story.
Appreciate that perspective with that. But before we dig into the news, and I'm dying to do so, trust me, I would just like to learn a little bit more about you. Can we go back to where you were born and raised in your family?
Sure. Okay. So I was born 1964, the year the Beatles invaded America, and I was born in Kitchener, Ontario,
Okay.
Canada. My mother's British. My father is of French-Canadian origin, thus LaFlamme. And I have 3 fabulous sisters who are my best friends today, and 8 amazing nieces and nephews. And
where are you in
I'm
the...
number 3, so
Okay.
of course
You're the baby.
middle. No, I'm number 3 of 4. So
okay.
total middle child syndrome. Anybody out there listening who is a middle child
Which
knows
means,
exactly what
tell
I mean.
me, because I'm the baby of 10.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I know, it's crazy.
Oh, well, you have no idea what I'm talking about,
Here we
then.
go.
Wow.
Oh, what was poor me.
Oh, my goodness. That's huge. Your family holidays must be amazing.
There weren't. We didn't know fit in the camper.
So
It couldn't
good.
happen that way. Okay, so middle child.
Okay, middle child. So my eldest is obviously, as the story goes with any child psychologists, the oldest and the youngest get all the attention.
Yeah.
So we would argue, my sister in the middle with me, we would argue that is the case. However, to be honest, we're all about a year apart.
Okay.
So we were kind of all one clump. My father raised us. I think he and my mother would have wanted sons, probably, because we learned how to fish. We learned all of those things
that's great.
growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and really it was a gender-free house in the sense that you could do anything you wanted. I mean, it certainly growing up, this was a male-dominated industry.
Yes,
I
always was.
I don't ever remember being told there was anything I couldn't do. And my mother has also been always incredibly encouraging and always my honest. In this industry, there's a lot of people who say yes. My mother is one person who gives me the honest truth
Love
of
that.
something. So, and my sisters. So I'm very lucky. We lost our father 10 years
Okay,
ago.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that's been a new transition as well.
Frivolous question, did you guys share clothes?
Oh, well, that's funny.
Or is that where the
That
fight
was a
stemmed
war.
from?
That was a war. We are much more generous with each other now.
Yeah, okay.
But back then in high school, if a sweater was borrowed secretively
Yes.
and brought back and you tried to put it right back in the exact same place, you'd be busted
Yeah,
every time.
never worked, right?
Yeah, we also wanted to steal our mother's clothes, so
Mhm.
I think we all inherited a love of clothes from her.
Really? She worked? She didn't stay at home?
She was a stay-at-home mom, yeah.
And she
was.
had great fashion?
She is just an absolutely stunning fashionista woman, yes.
Oh, well, now we know where you get it from.
That
It's
was
in
a
the
really
genes.
handy education as well, to know the difference between, just fabrics. I think it was the way she was raised as well.
So nothing you were told you couldn't do as a child, but I know when I was a kid, my mom said I asked why so much. She was like, if I have to answer that question again, oh my God, kiddo, she used to say. Were you an inquisitive kid? Where did the journalistic seeds, were planted in you?
I'm sure, I know that I was, but in growing up, that was, and it's a British term, my mother being British, I was called lippy all the time. Lippy.
Okay, I've heard
That
that.
is if you
Yeah.
talk back to someone, if you challenge someone, if you're not exactly on side with whatever the instruction of the day is, you were lippy. So I now interpret lippy as a great thing, and it did mean that I asked a lot of questions or pushed back as a
Right.
kid. And it's funny because, I still do that to this day. I'm sure a lot of people I interview don't appreciate it too much, but it's part of the deal.
It served you well.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, but I think for me, I didn't know what the word was, journalism, but I remember as far back as grade school, I remember as young as grade 3 or 4, writing stories. This sounds really pack ratty, but I still actually have all of the yellow foolscap, which I still use yellow foolscap today. It's like some weird thing, but I just was a story writer back then, and I remember going into grade 9, the guidance counselor, and saying, I want to be a journalist or reporter, and she told me I needed physics.
Physics?
Exactly.
What?
Physics, which I never needed. To this day, I do not need physics,
No.
but it was whatever, I guess it was a mandatory course. So I did take physics once. Sister Vivian got me through it, and that was done. So
You did the departmental and everything? Did they have?
we had the labs and the whole bit.
Oh,
But
gosh.
so It's always been there. I always sort of worked for school papers in high school, in university, radio. It was always there for some reason.
When did you know that you had hit the mark? Did you decide, like, okay, you're going off to journalism school? When did you know in your heart that this is it? Yeah.
Well, interestingly, I didn't. I knew it was going to happen, but I didn't know how. And at age 18, we had a semestered school. The school I went to, St. Mary's High School in Kitchener.
There's the plug.
There's the plug. And it was a semestered school, and I remember the French teacher saying in, say, November, does anybody want to go to France to be a jeune fille au pair, a nanny? And I shot my arm up right away. And in February of that year, because I graduated in January, and I went off to France. My sister and I did backpacking for a few months, and then I worked as a nanny for 2 little kids for over a year and applied for university. My parents basically came at one point in the following summer and said, okay, it's time to get back and get to school.
So what was at the heart of that decision?
I wanted adventure. I wanted to travel. I always had the travel bug. And I wanted to improve my French, which thankfully I was able to, when you're fully immersed. It was just the right thing for me to do. And I did audit classes at the University of Rouen, where I was living. And it was just traveled all over Europe at that age for those 2 years, and then went to University of Ottawa when I came back. And I remember getting back to Canada in August and having to go to, I had no residence or nowhere to live. And my father and I, this was his idea. We went to the swankiest neighborhood in Ottawa, and we literally knocked on doors of big, beautiful old homes in the glebe to see, would anybody take a boarder? Yeah, we truly did that.
And that's a genius idea.
Amazing.
Why didn't I think of that?
And it turned out great. I lived I had 1 bedroom where there was no fridge or anything, so I used to put my milk for my tea out on the roof, I guess, outside
tea
the window.
Tea drinker, not coffee?
Then I was a tea drinker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And anyway, I found this great place. This lovely elderly woman said, yeah, okay. She lived in a huge house. So I lived on Delaware in Ottawa when I was 20 years old and started university. Yeah, it was great. And then I went into, just different, basically quite dumpy places because I worked through my university.
Okay.
I first worked midnight till 8 a.m. at the switchboard in the residence, which I couldn't get a room in, but I needed the money.
Really?
Yeah, so I would work all night.
How did you turn that around and go to school?
I just did. I mean, I think I'd steal sleep when I could. I remember getting back to the boarding house at 8 in the morning, getting my bag and going to school. And then jobs got better. I worked at the Chateau Laurier, and I worked at the National Arts Center. Great paying jobs for a student, and allowed me to get my education. So it was a great experience. And now when I go back to the Chateau Laurier for work, it is truly, in fact, I was just back there last week. It's an amazing experience to know that I was the girl, filling the honor bar and the mini bar, whatever you call it, back in the early 80s,
A special connection. I'm sure probably a little emotional brings back.
It is emotional, honestly. It's all of that stuff is emotional to me because I remember it so vividly on one level, and on another, boom, next thing you know, it's 1988 and you've graduated, and now it's a question of where do you work? I don't know if it was the same for you, the challenge of getting a job in this business.
Oh gosh, you start at the bottom and you just work here. When my first job was in Yorkton, Saskatchewan.
Is that right?
And on one side, I was a photojournalist. I had my recorder, you'd carry it, and the other side was your camera, and they were so heavy you could barely walk.
It's so true, yeah.
Was that like that for you?
Well, for me it was a bit different because I first thought I was going to be in print, so I was trying to get a job in print. I was traveling, writing pieces. I wrote a piece for the Toronto Star. It was the first time I ever had a piece published.
Wow.
And that was like this huge moment. It was about some new development in Paris, France. And then I couldn't get a job. So I worked as a translator for like sort of helping executives move in Quebec 5 days a week, and got a Saturday and Sunday job in my hometown of Kitchener, 4 hours on a Saturday and 4 hours on a Sunday, basically writing 15-second international copy
Right.
stories, ripping scripts, running them around to the studio and the control room. And then the radio was connected at the time. Do you want to hear all this stuff?
Yeah, like I didn't know. I'm wondering, during this whole process, did you feel that high? Were you like, oh, this is just this is like fuel on my passion?
Yeah, I remember the first day of that first Saturday, and my parents picked me up after the 4-hour shift, and I was just on fire. I just wrote a story about Tegucigalpa, and now I know so much more of this, that. I do remember. Isn't that sad?
No, it's great. It's great. I like that you remember those moments. Those are defining moments, right?
And then I rolled into radio again for Saturdays and Sundays, 4 a.m. till noon. Still could not get a full-time job. And then one day, I was finishing a radio shift, and the television assignment editor said the Saturday night reporter had called in sick, and could I fill in? And I had never done television in my life, and I said, absolutely, of course, And of course, whipped home, had the counsel of my sisters and my mother on what I should wear that very first night. Yeah. And I did I went to a psychic fair funnily enough, in a pub that I'd always gone to every Thursday night. So I knew everybody. I made all my sisters go. And I did talk about participatory journalism. I had I guess it was my palm read or something.
Oh,
yeah.
That's gutsy.
Well, I didn't know. I shouldn't have, but I did it. I was
Was
very
it good news at least?
Well, it was interesting news because, strangely, all through the prism of time, this is odd, but that psychic saw flags of the world. Now, she didn't know anything about me, or I had done nothing, and I thought back on that, strangely, that maybe there is something to this palm reading business, because she saw flags of the world, and I would say that in 30 years I've probably seen most of them.
Isn't
that weird?
It really, that's powerful.
Yeah.
That's defining back
it
then.
was, yeah. Anyway, then I rolled in. I was kind of doing radio and TV. I was sick of working 7 days a week for 2 years, and I finally said, that's it. I'm going to just try this. And I applied to law school thinking, this is crazy. I can't get a full-time job. And then I did. I got it. It wasn't full-time, but it was enough hours that I could give up the other job and focus, and just basically did whatever I could do to learn, be better, be stronger, a better writer, and all of those things.
So the question is why?
Why?
Why and what do you love about journalism so much? Because clearly you worked your tail off just to get a full-time television news reporting job.
What is it? Somebody once said to me, journalism is the opioid of the restless, and I actually think that nails it. We have a short attention span, and we are always interested in other people's stories. That's why this is really weird to actually, and I'm not sure when to start or stop, because I'm not used to telling my own story.
Well, you're used to asking the questions.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm dying to
this
grill
is
you.
Fun. No doubt. That's for another time with wine.
Yes, okay. And no cameras.
Yes.
No microphone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to ask, before we move on with the career, a couple of questions that have popped up. Number one is, were you raised bilingual?
Well, not really. My father's family was French, but they came to Kitchener at a time when there was 1% French in that community. So, no, I learned French in school. We learned a few swear words in the family, but by and large, no. I learned the best part of my French was when I, as I say, was fully immersed in France, in that community,
Okay.
in that family.
There's lessons and power in that, because everyone always says if you want to really dig into a second language, you got to live
Yeah.
there.
I also always did feel a bit weird with a name like LaFlamme. I felt obligated that I should speak. My grandfather couldn't speak English, but
Okay.
it didn't follow through in those days to my father. So, you know, and I love seeing that a lot of my nieces and nephews are bilingual. So it's just so important. It's opened so many doors for me personally, and I'm a firm believer in it.
Oh, I mean, I will tell you this story. Back in the day when we used to tape the national news and then pull the stories off to run locally, when there was a question about French pronunciation, I'm like, I need to go back and see how Lisa said that, because it rolls off your tongue so
That's-
beautifully.
But you know what's so funny about that? Just yesterday, we had a story from Alberta, and I thought, there's no way this family pronounces it the French way. So I actually...
Do you remember what it was?
Well, it's a tragic story
Oh.
because it was the Edmonton family killed
in South Africa.
But their last name is Perrault.
Mhm.
But I thought, there's no way in Edmonton that's how they pronounce, and sure enough, it's parrot.
Yeah.
So I was glad in the end, and it's the same with Windsor, Ontario. There's a lot of communities where you have to, you know, Hotel Dieu Hospital,
Right.
and, you know,
Yeah.
there's so many examples of that.
There are, we have a reporter that works for us, Bill Fortier.
Oh, I
People-
know. It took me forever to call him Bill Fortier.
I know. Don't you feel odd saying that?
So
It's
true.
like, what?
He's a Winnipeg boy, though. So.
Exactly. Oh, he can't stump you. You know it all. My goodness. And the next question, I'm just because of my nerves here, I'm going to check and make sure. Yes.
Am I still? Are we still on?
Girl power
Can
here.
you hear
We're
me
still
now?
going?
Can you hear me now?
Pick up the story from the places that you worked at. You're in Kitchener. You finally get your television job. Where'd you go? How did you climb the ladder?
Well, I mean, it's not a typical path in the sense that I didn't have to do the Yorkton, Saskatchewans, and Prince George and all those stations. I would have, but I got a call in 1996. So I had been working since '89. At that point, I'd done a bunch of documentaries for CKCO in Kitchener.
Yes.
I was a reporter. Back then, though, you kind of had to do both. You had to anchor and
That's right,
report.
yeah.
So I would anchor the morning inserts on Canada AM, if you remember back
Yeah,
then.
Of course I do.
And report, and basically I did a ton of just on the side documentaries for them. And I got a phone call from Henry Kowalski, who
Oh
was
my
the then
gosh.
president. And do you know, I remember where I was standing when
I would
that
too.
phone rang. I was thinking, I'm being punked, you know. Henry Kowalski, would you come down?
Give us some
to
perspective for
Toronto?
those people who
He
aren't
was the
sure.
president of CTV
Yes.
News and an amazing journalist in his own right, and a great man. He called me out of the blue. Would I be interested in coming to Toronto for a conversation? Hello.
Right?
Yeah, so I got in the car, I think it was like the next day or 2 days later or something, and they wanted to do an audition. And I had a meeting with them, and they were starting News Channel. Several months later, they were
Yeah.
going to be, News Channel was going on the air, 24-hour news service. It was a big deal. And did I want to do, it was a hybrid job again, which I'd been used to because I felt like I'd always had these weird hybrid jobs. So I anchored News Channel on weekends, and I was the CTV National News consumer reporter. So basically,
that.
every Thursday, I had to deliver a scam for, uncover a scam for the national news for Lloyd Robertson. So that was weird too, because my days off were technically Thursday, Friday, but just the way you had to go check the camera now, I was that way. I couldn't possibly imagine not working the day one of my stories was going to go on the air, because you just want to perfect it right till the last minute on every level. So it turned out into another 7-day a week, but I didn't complain. I couldn't even believe I was here, and it was just a amazing experience back then to learn how the national news works.
But being the national consumer affairs correspondent, like that's the hot seat if there is one,
Yeah.
because
Found that out the
just
hard way.
give us a quick glimpse. Everything must have been lawyered. 'Cause if-
Everything was lawyered, and again, let's go back to being lippy. I learned then, because I don't ever remember a lawyer looking at any of my scripts in local news, and here it was now an everyday thing.
Yeah.
And I remember pushing back so hard against the lawyer, saying, well, technically we can say this, and we can go this far, you can push the envelope this far, because I'm not someone who ever wanted to water down a story. And if we should call out names, then we should call out names. Obviously, I also understand it's a very litigious world, and I didn't want to be on the receiving end of lawsuits, although I have been. But so I think that is really a relationship you build over time. But we did everything from, oh my goodness, if I could think of so many
stories.
scam
Right.
stories, furnace scams, auto scams, you name it.
Were you ever afraid?
I'm sure I was, but then other circumstances like covering war zones made that fear so much less, that in perspective, I mean, you never like hate mail. Back then it was actual mail. And it's always really hard to read if somebody, is threatening you. It's always hard. Now it's a lot more immediate. The death threats come on Twitter, so it's like, okay, well, you're some anonymous dude in someone's basement.
Exactly.
But so fear is a funny thing. I always feel it's been a bit of a driver for me.
Motivates you?
Well, I have to stand up to it. I don't know that it motivates me in the sense that I don't seek out dangerous things, but I don't shy away from them, because I realize if I am coming at a story as a journalist from the Western world, and I'm in, say, Afghanistan or Iraq, or name the place, just imagine what life must be like for those women and girls who have no voice. And that really has been the most important thing for me always, is to just give that voice where it is a whisper. And
Tell me more about that. Like, can you think of circumstances where you really felt passionate? This story has to be told.
Oh,
and
many.
Give us some of your highlights there, especially because when you were in the national affairs correspondent, you covered stories all over the world.
Yes, everywhere. And
Like
there was a lot.
war zones.
War zones and
What was that
disasters.
like?
Well, the first time I went to Iraq, I remember, speaking of fear, I mean, I never tell this story, but Carrie, there's something about you, girl.
Yay!
But the night before I left for Baghdad, I remember I was so emotional. I was really convinced, this is crazy. You're going to be shot in the head. You're going to be dead. And so I was afraid. I was afraid. I had done war camp, if you can call it that. It's war training. I went to England and I learned how to tie a tourniquet in case my cameraman got shot or I got shot.
Really?
You learn how to breathe if someone puts a burlap bag over
Right.
your head if you're being kidnapped. You learn what a scorpion looks like in case you get bit. And interestingly, okay, back up. So I'm 4 days into a 7-day training course, and the assignment desk phones me at the camp in England, at the training camp, and says, we need you in Baghdad tomorrow. I'm like, I
You're
still
not
have 3 days
done.
left.
Yes.
I can't go yet. But you never say no. It's a business where you never want to say no. Anyway, so I left. They gave me half a certificate or something, and I got to Baghdad, and so I actually got to Amman. In those days, you had to drive into Baghdad because it was too dangerous to fly over. And once I had been shot at, we were in a plane flying from Jordan to Baghdad, and the plane was shot at with surface-to-air missiles, and we did have to go back to Amman to regroup.
Gosh.
I could fill hours with some of the
course.
weird little things that happened. But I remember being stopped once in a car in Baghdad by a U.S. Marine who looked about 18, full on acne. Literally, he looked like a high school boy, and he put a gun right to my temple. A Western journalist. It shows that they were scared. To me, I mean, I was scared, obviously, because I thought, this idiot is trigger happy. He doesn't even realize what he's doing. And then I just kept sort of smiling and got through it, and that was fine. We got through that one. It was when you were stopped by Iraqi forces that the smiling helps. I mean, you really do learn how to get out of sticky situations just by your body language, especially when you don't speak the language. So.
But what protection did you have over there?
Well, I had a fixer who.
What's that?
A fixer is someone you hire who speaks the language and is, in this case, Majid was my longtime fixer in Baghdad, and he had a 9mm wrapped in a filthy towel that would sit between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. And I always sort of was afraid I was going to accidentally nudge it with my elbow. We had an armored car when things got really bad, like the insurgency really picked up in Baghdad, and we had an armored car, or they said it was armored. I used to always think, oh my God, we're paying all this money. Is it armored? But how are you going to test that? Fire a bullet into the...
Exactly. That's the only way you're really going to know.
So that he would know, and we'd had full conversations. Like if I'd say, I want to go to this neighborhood because I hear the Shia and the Sunni are actually getting along. So there's a man and woman who've just married, Sunni and Shia. That was like revolutionary.
Unheard of, yes.
And I want to go tell their story. And so just a simple thing like that would require, maps out and security forces talking to each other of different media organizations would hire security. And we were entrenched, embedded with ABC News, so they also had a great security infrastructure. We lived in this villa that was boarded off with big, huge cement abutments, so nobody could get in or out. But there was a bomb that went off very close, and I remember vividly the adobe coming down on my head and in the wall, and there's like lots of strange experiences that
so crazy
that
the way
happen.
you talk about it. It's just like, oh yeah, it just happened
Well,
last week.
I don't mean to make it
you
sound
don't,
that
but I'm
way
asking
because
I just why did you never just want to throw in the towel and say, geez, this is my life?
There were times. There was one time in Afghanistan, and my cameraman and I have talked about it. He and I went through a lot together. Dave Brunet, amazing cameraman in Montreal that we still work together. We just worked the election together, as a matter of fact. But we were in a poppy field in Afghanistan following like 18 Canadian forces through this field. They were on a presence patrol. So they were basically just so the village would see, oh, the Canadian forces are here, we're going to be fine. That's the goal of these presence patrols, just to show your face for the soldiers. And the goal for a journalist is you never want to be a liability if you're traveling with military.
Right.
And we were fired at, small arms fire, intense small arms fire. And I remember everybody just boom, down, hit the dirt in the poppy field, and inching our way across a wadi, which is a sort of a small riverbed. So you now not only are you crouching, you're soaked in your gear and everything, and poor Dave's trying to hold the camera up so it doesn't get wet, and he's still rolling. We get up, we're sort of hiding behind a grape drying building, whatever it was, for hours. And I remember thinking, okay, you are so out of shape, because I could not walk for, I think it took me 2 days after that experience. Probably that fear also must have done something to my muscle strength. Yes. And so what I vividly remember is feeling like a 90-year-old woman. And I think at that time I did say, is this how I'm supposed to die, in a poppy field in Kandahar province? And it didn't feel like the end. You know, you never stop. And you, anytime I've ever been in an experience like that, you don't give in. You just keep going and see where you end up.
Because the story needs to be told.
The story, you feel a commitment to share, especially in that case. I mean, the families of the military, they were watching every night. They wanted to see their sons and daughters in this remote part of the world, and that they were doing good, and they were trying so hard to do good. Opening schools that would get bombed 3 days later, trying to improve hospital conditions in Kandahar City, then it would get bombed. I mean, there was a lot of highs and lows to covering it, and I did it for 6 years, Afghanistan, after 3 or 4 years back and forth to Iraq. So it was a very intense time.
There are so many stories. I mean, I'm sure like you said, we could talk for probably days. I need to understand, though, as you rattle these things off, I have to hold space for your memory. Your memory is have you always had this? Like, you remember details and names and locations, and you've traveled the whole world covering. Like, are you just
I don't remember yesterday.
All the time?
I don't remember yesterday. No, there's tons of, that's so funny you should say that, because I worry so much about my memory. I think I've blocked huge parts out, probably because of this. You know, some covering Katrina was a life-changing.
Oh, I remember
the
that.
one time I actually did take advantage of the company. Has a therapy service if you cover stories and you really feel you need to talk to somebody. And I remember a male colleague coming out of Katrina, and he was very troubled as well. And he told me, he'd gone to talk to the therapist. And I thought, oh, well, if he can do it. And I walked in, I'll never forget this, actually. So maybe it's the pivotal things I remember. It was at Yonge and St. Clair. I walk into this therapist's office. Katrina was a devastating story because I'd just been on vacation there with my sister a few months before. And now at the mouth of the hotel we'd stayed at, there's a body laying there. There were just bodies on the overpasses, the underpasses. It was a truly, and it felt like home because it's the United States, you know. Anyway, I walk in this therapist's office. It was a 45-minute session. She asked me one question. I burst out crying. She handed me a box of Kleenex, and I don't think I got a whole sentence out through that 45 minutes. And at the end, she said, I really think, Lisa, you need to come back. And I went, yeah, okay. And I never did go back, but I always thought I should have gone back, because you definitely find a way to just
suppress it.
Yeah, I think
so
you do.
Why were you afraid to let those feelings out and to acknowledge them?
I don't think it was a fear as much as, this sounds so pathetic, timing. It's hard to, because right after Katrina, there was another horrifying Hurricane Rita, which was devastating to Texas. And that's one of the downsides, is there's really not a lot of time in my life to take care of business, so to speak.
I appreciate that. So you open the door to the next question of how do you deal with the negativity? It's the nature of the business.
Well,
news by nature is negative.
I think you mean, how do I deal with what we cover all the time? That is really increasingly difficult.
Why increasingly?
Because I think I'm first of all, a very emotional person anyway, and
that surprises me. I have to jump in because,
really?
well, on the news, every once in a while we get to see you laugh, but, you know.
I guess you find it. I mean, first of all, when you're doing the newscast, you've written it, you know it, it's in you. By the time the camera is on, and I always think it's a joke in a way. The most important thing maybe to the viewer is that when the show starts.
Yes.
But really, it's the whole day and the whole lead up and the writing and all of that stuff that really is that's the work part, the hard work part. But you can't be like, William Hurt or whoever was in broadcast news where he cried on camera. I'm not that person. Sometimes I haven't been able to conceal the emotion, depending on the story. But
do you remember any? Do you know, for me it was with Sandy Hook.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I remember where I was when that story broke. It was a
9/11.
Friday. I remember vividly those are the things, sadly, I do remember.
Yeah.
I remember, like, 9/11 was my second day on the job at Canada AM. And I, first of all, wasn't even sure I wanted that job.
Yeah.
I was an Ottawa parliamentary correspondent. I loved it. And then I get the call, would you come? We're interested in you hosting Canada AM. And which was an amazing team of people at the craziest hours.
I was going to say, but early. Did you enjoy that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
I did it for 2 years, and I was really honest about it. Like, as I said, the second day was 9/11, so actually I was strangely back in New York City that night or the next night, and we did 8 days of shows out of New York City. So I got that part. I was back on the street. I knew how to do that.
Yeah.
The hard part was I don't cook in my personal life, and all of a sudden I'm supposed to cook on national television.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a perfect fit.
No, it was a stretch.
For me, it was a tough one. So, and I was drawn to the Middle East. I really was. So I did 2 years, and I did enjoy. I love the people still to this day. That I knew I was more interested in harder news stuff. Everybody's different, you know, and that was my fit.
Tell me what it was like for you to step in and be asked to fill in for Lloyd Robertson.
To fill in back in the day?
Initially, when you started to fill in.
Fear. You talk about fear? That was fear.
Yeah.
I mean, I do get nervous even now if I'm doing a big event or something. Oh, absolutely. I feel that as I said to you before, I think it's part of my DNA. It makes me better or stronger or more alert. But filling in for Lloyd was a singular experience because it was Lloyd Robertson.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Lloyd Robertson. Hello.
Who's now
My
a very
entire
dear
life.
friend of yours, right?
He truly is. And he's
Yes.
always been such an amazing mentor and guide. There is never a time I can't phone Lloyd and say, look, help me out here. What did you do in this circumstance? Or how should I navigate this or that? Or he's just an incredible man and has been a great teacher for me. But it was still very scary. And I think it was a New Year's Eve, to be honest. So when no one's watching anyway.
Or so you think.
So you think. And back then that was the thing. You'd fill in on all the holidays and stuff like that. It's
But
still
that moment, Lisa, when you sat in that chair
just-
at the national news desk and said,
scary. I remember trying hard not to have a waver in my voice, like a quiver.
Yes.
And that actually lasted a while because you don't do it all the time. You know, you fill in when you're asked to, and but it's so funny. I haven't thought about that in so long that you've kind of. But I do remember being very nervous.
I bring it up because I was watching from the sidelines all the time and cheering when I saw you fill in, but when you
sweet.
got the job, I mean,
Wow.
I happy danced for you. I was like, yes, she's so good.
Oh,
she's
now I have a
perfect.
lump in my throat.
And like sitting in this room with you and to see that headline, Time for a Woman at CTV
Wow.
News. I mean, you blazed a trail, Lisa. What was that like?
Well, when I heard the news, or when I was given the job, it was before it was public, and I kind of had to keep it a secret.
gosh.
And that was really difficult.
You must have
because-
told your sisters.
Yeah, I totally
Okay.
did.
And your
I
mom
can
and
say
dad?
that now.
Yeah.
It's been almost 9 years.
Okay.
So. But sadly, my father had passed away 6 months before, and it would have been. I mean, it would have been.
But
that
he
was-
did get to see you.
He
when you
did.
filled
Yeah,
in.
he did.
But
yeah.
yeah, I know. I appreciate the emotion. I've lost both my parents too, and there's nothing greater than knowing that they can take part
Yeah.
in your moment because they
Yeah.
brought you to your moment
Exactly.
in many ways.
Yeah, and I
right?
think my mom really did fill in on both fronts for my mother and
Yeah.
father at that time because it was a time of excitement in the family and in the community for Kitchener, having
course.
worked there. It was,
For the country, Lisa,
Well,
we were celebrating you.
No, it was very
First
kind of you.
female
Yeah.
on a national news desk.
Yeah,
This is
it
big.
it was really exciting, and it still is. I mean, that's never lost on me, to be honest. I mean, it's not new to have women anymore. It really isn't.
No.
I mean,
Did
but-
you precede Katie Couric on the desk?
Gosh, I can't remember.
Either way, there's been like
I actually
such
can't remember, but Connie Chung, I remember it always used to be a double anchor, though.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, well, we can't leave the woman alone
No,
on the desk.
no.
We've got to put a.
So what does that feel like for you? Like you.
Well, it's
and for other women that are watching.
Well, I don't think there's anything woman or man, like I never, as I said, I was raised without thinking that was an issue. It was never an issue. Whenever I experienced even sexual harassment in the workplace, I was kind of just like, you know, I don't know. It never slowed me down.
Mhm.
Let me put it that way. Being a woman has never slowed me down.
Is it because you use your voice?
Well, I guess so. You know,
I
even
mean-
I do remember when I wanted to go to war zones. I remember there were some issues at that time because there were not a lot I guess it increased for
Mhm.
sure. But I was one of them. Maybe there were times I was one of two women in a whole press corps in different places in the world, and that is completely changed. Thank God.
Mhm.
There is no barrier anymore. In my opinion, there's no barrier, and we wouldn't even think twice about sending a man or a woman to any story. It's
Mhm.
all about the journalism and the
Yes.
ability to tell the story, and also to be able to manage the fear and manage the incredible pull on you, because as you know, I mean, it's nonstop. You're just working 20-hour days, and
Exactly.
you have to really want it to do that.
I'm curious to. I'm going to shift gears about talking about elections. Like, how much prep do you do for election?
That's an intense, maybe the most intense. It's also the most important thing we do as a
Yes.
network, and it is around the clock. And this time we traveled the country. We took the show on the road
Mhm.
because we really wanted to focus on the voter and the issues that mattered to people right across the country. That helped me though, because for me, if I can see it and touch it and speak to
Yeah.
people, I internalize what their issues are. So that actually helped me on
Mhm.
election night. Memorizing 338 ridings is a nightmare. But
And you literally do that?
Well, I can't memorize all of them. I try to do as much as I
Mhm.
can. But you're also focused on all of not just the 5-week campaign, but the government that was, and